Hi everyone, I'm Philipp. Welcome to the talk of our paper, As Soon as It's a Risk, I Want to Require MFA. Today we're going to talk about how administrators configure risk-based authentication. This is joint work with three awesome colleagues of mine, so I would like to thank Theo, Max, as well as Markus for their help. But before we start, let's go back in time a bit. Let's go back to the moment when you arrived in Boston. At that point, some of you may have received a notification asking you, hey, was that you logging in from Boston? Or, hey, we just noticed a new sign into your device. Was that you? What happened at that point was risk-based authentication. I tried to sum it up in one little sentence. During the login of a user, calculate a risk based on contextual factors, like for example, the device and the location. What it means in my everyday case is I have my Android device and I log in from Bochum here in Germany, and that might be associated a low risk. There's nothing special about this login. Now let's assume I would have been able to travel to Boston. I would have taken my device with me, and the only thing that differs is the location, so a medium risk. A little thought experiment, someone with my login credentials logging in on an iOS device in a research station in the Antarctica, that might be associated a high risk. This login is completely strange and there's nothing usual about it at all. So this is risk-based authentication, or at least the basis of it. Now let's move on to the actual configuration. The configuration system that we analyzed in our study is based on Amazon. Why Amazon? Well, first of all, it is a good representative across all the 16 different services that we analyzed. And in addition to that, it is also the market leader in this field, so many administrators may have a high chance of seeing it during their everyday life as a system administrator when configuring risk-based authentication. Now, the first thing that needs to be configured is the behavior, so the reaction in response to the risk level. There are four different ones, four different behaviors. The first one is just simply allowing the login. The second one, optional MFA, means requiring MFA for those who have set it up and just allowing the login for those who have not set it up. And then required MFA means requiring it, and if you have not set it up, your login will be blocked, and block simply means that the login will be disallowed. The second thing that needs to be configured is whether or not we want to notify the user. Binary decisions, so we either notify the user or not. In this case, like I said, I usually log in from Bochum. I usually don't receive notification. When logging in from Boston, that may be the case. So this needs to be configured. The third thing that could be configured in our system here was changing notification or not. Again, this is a binary decision, changing it or not changing it. However, I would like to leave that to the interested reader due to the time constraints that we have. Now, let's move on to the actual research questions. The first one is very simple. How do administrators configure risk-based authentication? The second one builds on top of it. What happens when they configure it? Which obstacles and misunderstandings do they encounter? The third one is a bit more complex. What is the impact of previous exposure to other ABA systems? I said there are different ones out there and multiple of them. And how do different requirements influence administrators? However, again, I would like to leave that to the interested reader. Now, let's move on to the method. How did we answer our research questions? The first thing that we let our administrators do is we let them configure the risk-based authentication, again, based on a system that is influenced by Amazon. Afterwards, we gave them, or before that, we gave them a scenario telling them, well, you're the system administrators of the Media Shop Corporation, and please enable risk-based authentication for the shop dresscode.com. Afterwards, they were given some questions. As part of that, for example, the system usability scale, and at the very end, our interviews, which we conducted with each of our participants. How many participants were there? Well, there were 28 administrators, and all of them worked as administrators. How long did they work as administrators? Well, some of them only a short time, but many of them work more than 10 years, and some of them even more than 15 years of experience, or have more than 15 years of experience in their job as an administrators. Okay, now on to the very first research question. How do administrators configure RBA at all? Again, we have our three risk levels, low, medium and high, and our behaviors that we can choose in response to them. So the allow, optional, require MFA and the block. Now let's see what our administrators in our study chose for the low risk. 9 of them went with allowing the login, and 19 in total went with one of the two forms of multi-factor authentication, even for low risk. When asking them about the configuration, one of them said, well, as soon as it's a risk, I simply want to require MFA. How is it for the medium risk? Most of them went with the optional MFA and some of them went with the requiring MFA, but again, the majority went with the optional MFA here. So either requiring it for the ones who have set it up or just simply allowing the login for those who have not. For the high risk, situation is different again. 17 went with requiring MFA and even 10 decided to block logins which are associated a high risk. When asking participants about their configuration, one of them said, well, it is just dresscode.com. Had it been my bank, maybe block is more prudent. So this participants considered this scenario and said for a different scenario, a different outcome may have been possible. All right, now on to the notification. Again, this is a binary decision, either notifying the user or not. Let's see what the administrators went with for the low risk. 21 went with notifying users in that case, but 7 decided to deactivate the notification. One of them said, if you get bombarded with login notifications, you get annoyed, and that's why this participant decided to deactivate the notification for low risk logins. For the medium and the high risk, the situation is similar, because the majority simply went with notifying the user in those cases. All right, so far for the very first research question. Let's go on to the second one, the obstacles and misunderstandings. The first part here deals with the understanding of the risk level calculation, because this is something that the administrators in our study demanded. One participant said, if I don't know exactly what low, medium or high risk means, then there is no reason for me to distinguish between them. And what does it mean? Well, this affects the user because there's like no difference at all between the different risk levels, and this is what initially risk-based authentication is all about. It's different outcomes based on different risk levels. A second participant had a similar answer, still it was a bit different. Let's see. Which parameters classify low, medium or high risk? That would definitely be a criteria for me when adopting it. So again, this participant wanted to understand what medium, high and low risk means. However, the outcome is different because this reduces sales, because it affects the company that offers the service, but not the users. Second part here is the awareness about all risk levels. And this is something that different services solve differently, but the way that this is solved in this case here, so this is special for Amazon, is as follows. I told you about the 3 risk levels, so low, medium and high, and the configuration that can be selected in response to it. However, there's also a fourth outcome, and that is no risk at all. And if the system decides there is no risk about a login, the login is always allowed. However, this is not part of the actual configuration, and this is not seen in the interface at all, but this is something that the system does underneath. Other systems or services who offer risk-based authentication solve that differently by making all risk outcomes, so even the no risk outcome, part of the actual configuration, so that administrators are aware about all outcomes at all points in time. Third aspect, the understanding of crucial terms. There are different ones which are crucial. I picked the two most interesting ones in my opinion. First one is the optional MFA. Again, I said it is the case here, so either the user has set MFA up for the account, then it is required and asked for at that point, or if users have not set it up, the system will simply continue as it would be an allow. However, this is something which is not, well, let's say normal to an administrator who has not worked with that system before. And one of our administrators in the study said, well, an attacker will just skip it, and for users it's just convenient to skip it. So this administrators did not have a look in more detailed information about the login or about the outcome that can be selected, but came up with their very own interpretation of it, which of course makes sense given that it says optional MFA. However, this makes crystal clear that information needs to be present at the point of the at the point in time when administrators do the actual configuration. A second and even more prominent example is the block. For all of us, it makes sense that, well, it's just simply a block of the login. Yes, that's what the participants in our study said as well. However, one participant asked very detailed questions. How long will the block last for? Is this an indefinite block, or is it just a slowdown of the login attempts? All legitimate questions, and administrators demand this information because they are not just everyday users. They are the ones who have to configure it, so they really need this information. All right, and this already brings me to the end of my talk. Let's sum it up real quick. The first thing that we talked about is the risk-based authentication, so the 3 risk levels and the configuration options that we have. Afterwards, we talked a bit about the method that we use in order to answer our research questions. And finally, I gave you a brief outlook of our results. Again, there are many more, so please feel free to ask me afterwards or have a look at our paper. And that brings me to the end. Feel free to contact me at any time, ask me questions now, afterwards. We have different ways of contacting me. I'm happy to answer anything that you will ask me.